Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 495. My name is Minter Dial and I'm your host for this podcast. A very proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows in the network, please go and visit evergreenpodcasts.com. So this week's interview is with Alison Jones. Alison has been a pioneer in publishing since 1992. From her days as an editor with Chambers Harrop and Oxford University Press to Director of Innovation Strategy at Macmillan before setting up Practical Inspiration Publishing in 2014. Today, Alison helps business leaders write and publish exceptional business and self-development books. And she also champions the value of both reading and writing in business. She's a podcaster and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, This Book Means Business. Her new book, coming out in mid-December 2022, is a treat. Exploratory Writing, Everyday Magic for Life and Work. We discuss in this podcast how writing can be such an amazing tool to figure out challenges and connect dots. We also look at some of the practical elements and exercises to create the right space to write. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com, and if you do have a moment, please go and drop in a rating. And don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Alison Jones.
Minter Dial.
You betcha. Well, it's so fun to be nerdy and weedy about writing. You've been in the publishing business since 1992, I was reading. You have your own publishing company. And although I didn't really want to date you in that date per se, how would you describe the state of publishing today? It has gone through quite the rinse, repeat, and wash.
Oh, yeah. So I've been hearing about the death of the book pretty much since the day I walked in my first day as an editorial assistant in 1992. It's funny, isn't it? You know, if you put a kind of a book, a CD-ROM, and a video cassette in front of somebody in sort of, the mid-90s and said, which would you put money on of these of surviving? You probably wouldn't have picked the book. But it's amazing how resilient the print format has been. And we've got lots of additional formats now. We've got, obviously digital audio, we've got ebooks and so on, but they coexist. They have different affordances. And yeah, the print book seems to go from strength to strength. It's almost the thinginess of it that gives it its value today. It's something you can gift, you can sit it on your desk. It furnishes a room really well, all that kind of stuff. So it's not easy, the publishing world. It never has been. But yeah, you wouldn't want to write it off just yet.
So to speak. What I hear is that there are about 1 million titles being published every year. And so it feels rather daunting as a writer. Clearly, the business model itself is adjusted to allow for the fact that maybe 25% will be audiobook, another percentage are electronic versions, Kindle and the like, and the rest are in paperback, sometimes hardback. But what is the encouragement for an author to write in such a sea of millions of other books already coming out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, I think there's a place for asking yourself, should I write a book? Because there's lots of other ways of getting your message across. And it's not easy. In a sense, it's easier than it ever was to publish a book, but it's as hard as it ever was to write a good one. And there's enough bad ones out there. You don't need to add to that. Why would you do it? I think, as I say, the value of the book, the cultural value of it is still so huge. And even if nobody were ever to read it, the work that you do as an author of clarifying your thinking, articulating it, structuring it in a way that allows you to put it in a book, honestly, that in itself, it's one of those benefits that people don't think about beforehand, but nearly every author I have worked with has said that it was one of the biggest benefits to them, because once you can articulate how you do things, the model, the way you see the world, the way you work with people, that intellectual property goes into every aspect of your business. So as a business person, there's huge value in doing it, if only to create intellectual property in your business. But in terms of the book itself, it almost becomes a form of currency in the business. And if you're speaking, if you're running workshops, you get this wonderful blend of, you're in the room with people, and there's an energy and immediacy, a kind of real experiential dimension to that. But then you leave the room, and if they have a book, then they're kind of taking away a little bit of you. And those two work together really well, I think.
Yeah, souped up business card.
No, I think it's more than that. It's not just here's my book. Do you want to work with me? I think you want to be really thinking about how the two work together, so that you create that sort of synergistic. Here I am talking to you, working with you. Here's the book that will help you explore these ideas more deeply, remind you of the principles. That's how I think of business books, more than just a business card, but a real complement to the business.
No, surely. And in your first book, it was called This Book Means Business, Clever Ways to Plan and Write a Book That Works Harder for Your Business. Surely that's the punchline. It's really a complement to who you are and your business, as opposed to just a card.
And the writing of it, as well as this incredibly kind of fertile period, which is what I talk about in This Book Means Business, that lovely kind of growth spiral in there, where you're not just writing the book and developing yourself, but in the process of writing, you can be reaching out to people, building your network. You can be doing it in public, which is how I started the Extraordinary Business Book Club podcast, literally to invite people on and pick their brains, but it started to build a platform and great connections, many of whom went on to endorse the book and then link me to other people. So there's this great kind of period while you're writing. For goodness sake, if you're thinking about writing a book, don't shut yourself in a room and do it as fast as you can. Use that period, do your thinking in public, get people engaged with your ideas, get feedback, ask who else should I speak to about this, because all of that is business building, as well as making a better book.
Oh, 100%. And I take a leaf out of the book of Mitch Joel, a friend and podcaster who's written a few great books. And as he in his podcast, he typically invites only authors, because the effort of having written a book, even if it's not a bestseller, does that sort of, you've crystallized thoughts, you've made that effort. So clearly you have some kind of almost indignation about getting this message out.
That's a great word. Yeah, there's an energy, and there's not just a starting energy, but a seeing it through energy. And that's incredibly powerful.
So not to take it on me, but I did want to share something, now that we're getting into this, about how books used to be written in the 19th century. At least some of them were, where they were serially published on a weekly basis. And for this year, Alison, I have endeavored to do that myself. So I'm in the process of writing a chapter a week, published every Thursday at 5 p.m. on Substack. And I can tell you that is a wholly different gig than writing a book as a book, because I'm publishing, it's exposing it constantly. And then there's the constant other 6 days where I'm thinking about it, talking about it, getting comments. It's a wholly different experience. Do you think there's a place for that type of writing? I mean, or am I just barmy?
I think it's a really smart strategy for getting stuff done, because you've got that public accountability. You've got a consistent beat to that, which is so powerful, because, write book, that's a huge, big thing on your to-do list, isn't it? It's very easy to let it slip to the bottom. But write a chapter in time for next week's Substack deadline, you can do that. That's a really specific goal. So if only from a kind of pragmatic perspective, I think that's a really good idea. And you're doing all that good stuff that we were talking about. You're socializing your ideas, you're getting feedback, you're forcing yourself to clarify and articulate and think and get it out. And often people are so precious about their intellectual property, about their ideas. It's all about execution, and it's all about engagement. So I would say to anybody who's thinking about, I wouldn't want to do that, I want to keep it all and then launch it complete and perfect on an unsuspecting world. Yeah, don't do that. Get it out there, start the writing, building that accountability and visibility. It's much more likely you'll get it done, and it's much more likely that it'll be readable. So I know, I love that.
I'm hoping so. But on my first chat with a publisher, it didn't go down well. You're publishing it already? So we'll see.
Yeah.
I've got a community of 700 people or 750 or so subscribers who are in Substack reading, or at least, subscribed. And then I've also thought about putting a gate. So for the people who don't pay, so there's like an element that won't be published for everybody. But we'll see. Anyway, that's a little bit of a side swoop. I want to get back to exploratory. Oh, you wanted to say something?
Well, it's just that there's an interesting point there about the different dynamics in publishing. So for a traditional publisher, it is all about putting a gate in front of the content. And that's how publishers make their money. They sell the content. So for a traditional publisher, it kind of makes no sense to make all the content available and then try and sell the book. But I think that's such an outdated way of looking at it, because actually, when you write the book, you'll revise that stuff, you'll work it up and everything.
Sure.
When you think about Joe Wicks, he would never have been the success that he has been with those recipe books had he not been putting all those recipes up on YouTube. That's what got him the audience. So I think we really have moved on, and I think publishers need to catch up with the sense that it's not about locking down intellectual property so much anymore as building engagement and an audience. So interesting.
And back to the experience of the book versus reading online. I mean, reading a 3,000-page chapter online is not a piece of cake, even if you can get it into Kindle and so on and so forth. And plus, you're never going to sit down and read the whole book in its swoop. Whereas a book, which will, of course, be edited differently, present itself as a different kind of product, we will see if my madness has any reason. Let's get to exploratory writing.
Yes,
this everyday magic for life and work, which comes out on the 13th of December, 12th for the Kindle. Lovely. I want to quote something you wrote I think it's at the end of the book. You say, "For me, the most magical part of the process is the potential it presents." Tell us about that potential, Alison.
Yeah, thank you. That's when you end a book, it's always really hard to end with something that will stick in people's minds. So nice to know that I did that. That's good. And so my argument in exploratory writing is really that we have only got a small part of what writing can be in our toolkit. We think of writing as communication. We think of it as, when we've had an idea, we write it down so that we can, share it with other people. And what exploratory writing is the writing that you do before you have a clue what you're really thinking. It's the writing that helps you make the stuff that's going in your head visible to yourself, not to anybody else. And that's really important, because that's safety of the blank page. And that's what I mean about the potential that represents. When you sit down and you commit to exploratory writing just for yourself, however messy or raw or frankly awful it's going to be, you don't know what's going to come out, and that's amazing. And I think we spend so much time mired in all the stuff that's facing us. There is something symbolically powerful about sitting down with a blank sheet of paper and knowing that right now, for the next 6 minutes, or however long you do, I suggest 6 minutes, but it can be whatever you work for yourself. This is a space that is entirely yours. It can be whatever you need it to be. You've no idea what's going to come out of it. If you don't get a great idea out of it, you've only lost 6 minutes, but it's very likely that something will shift, because when you create that time and that space and you write just for yourself, it is the act of writing that draws out the ideas. And I think this is one of those secrets that professional writers have always known. They don't hang around waiting for ideas and then go and write them down. They sit their bum in the seat and they start writing, and there comes the stuff. And that's what I think most people who don't write professionally haven't quite understood.
So you write a little bit about this, but I make a big difference between the way you talk about exploratory writing and journaling. Journaling, as I understand it, is more you wake up in the morning groggy and you just write down stuff, or you just write. It's just writing for writing's sake. It felt for me in your exploratory writing, there's far more intention in the exploration.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. And, journaling is a wonderful thing, and people do it in different ways. I mean, the one you described there is perhaps more like morning pages, which I talk about in the book, Julia Cameron's process, which is very much about unlocking your creativity. and powerful, really powerful. And I think a lot of people do journaling almost at the end of the day, 3 things I'm grateful for. But you tend to, not so much morning pages, but with journaling, you tend to be writing in a journal, hence the name. And therefore, you're kind of censoring yourself in a way, because this is a book that you are keeping on the shelf. Somebody might come upon it one day. You might want to read it another day. You never know. You might publish it one day. And there's a sort of, you want to be proper. You want to get the spelling right. You want to say something profound enough that it bears reading back on, in a year's time. Whereas the 2 aspects, I think, that are different to journaling for exploratory writing are, firstly, yes, I suggest that you start with a prompt. And it can basically just bring to the forefront of your mind and start you writing on the paper about whatever is there for you right now, whatever it is you're grappling with, that you're ruminating on, that you just can't find the solution to. I'm quite a pragmatic person, and I think if you're going to have 6 minutes out of your day to write, it might as well be in service of something that's going to really, move you forward. And there's also this wonderful mental reflex that we have called instinctive elaboration, which is, if somebody asks you a question, at some level, you can't help but start answering it. So, hey, if you're going to have a mental reflex, you might as well use it. So if you start that prompt, that question, it lines your brain up and kind of unleashes it. And it's amazing what that can do. And then the other big distinction is that I'm saying, by all means, have a journal. By all means, put in the things that at the end of the process have come out for you. But for that initial part of the process, it's going to be raw, it's going to be messy. You need to be absolutely sure that nobody else is ever going to read this. You don't want to be thinking about choosing the right word, or whether you've got the spelling right, or where the heck does the apostrophe go. You just want the absolute, fast, uncensored freedom of writing down any old how, because that isn't the important thing. The important thing is where it takes you. And then you can rip it up and you can put it in the recycling bin.
I want to get back to that in a moment, but there's something that kind of piqued me in the wrong way, was when you referred to the Orna Ross's free, and one of the E's was exact, which I was like, oh, that's really constraining, as opposed to free, raw, easy, I throw it away. Exact made it feel, well, not free at all. That was my feeling.
Yeah, what she means by that, and I hope I explained it well, but if I haven't, I've done her a disservice, is that it's specific. So if you are, for example, why do I feel so unsettled? You're being really specific. You're not just kind of using generalities, or I always do this. You're challenging yourself to pick out, where is that feeling in me? What does it feel like? When does it happen? Or actually, when this thing happened, let's think about, what was the sense impression? What did the person actually say? So it's more that sense of digging in and not letting yourself get away with the lazy generalities that I mean by, I think that she means by exact. She's using it, of course. Orna Ross, who's the head of ALI, the Association of Independent Authors, is using it in the sense of creative writing particularly, but I think it works for exploratory writing too.
Well, in very much in the way you talk about the intentionality. I must say that in the chapter you talk about the neurological aspects of writing, this instinctive collaboration was the one that was like, whoa, I don't know about that. That was a real learning for me. And I very much enjoyed that. So writer as I am, fountain pens by the dozen, you definitely say it's about writing with a pen or a pencil on a piece of paper, and you talk about how there is the ability to draw as well as to write. But what about typewriting? Where is there not a space for typewriting in this, or do you feel that it really has to be the kinetic effort of writing, and that we somehow genetically have encoded ourselves for the meaningfulness of pen in hand?
I don't know about genetically encoded, but there's certainly some neurological stuff that goes on when you are kinetically involved with a pen on paper that doesn't happen so much when you have the interface for keyboard. So, I mean, you say typewriter. I don't know how many people actually use a typewriter these days. What they're really using.
I'm dating me.
What they're really using is a word processor. Yeah. And a word processor has certain marvelous things about it that don't lend themselves well to exploratory writing. They have spelling correction things, and sometimes the spelling correction thing can't work out what you tried to say because you're typing so fast and so messily, and it's really hard not to go back and correct that, which takes you out of the flow.
For those of us who are anal in that category, I'd be one.
For most people, that little red line, wiggly line, is pretty, it's pretty confusing. It's pretty distracting is the word. And then the other thing is it's really clean and linear, and anything that you type, even in a kind of frenzy of, writing in the most raw, messy way you can, it looks really neat and tidy. And it's got a polished, and this is what you're used to seeing in finished documents. And psychologically, there's something a bit jarring about that. Whereas if you're writing on a piece of paper with your pencil or your pen or, whatever comes to hand, back of a fact pack, whatever it is, there's a provisionality about that. There's a sort of course this isn't right. Of course I can't press send on this. It's early stage thinking. And I think that gives your brain more permission to think more out of the box, to call up the things that you would never say to anybody else, to swear on, whatever it is that you need to do. And yes, as you say, there's also the brilliant way that you can cross out and you can star things and you can draw. I'm describing it with my hands, which is a complete waste of time on a podcast, but you can sort of draw arrows to connect ideas, and you can, if you're a visual thinker and it's not working, you can start to draw out what this problem looks like. Here's the department, here's the shape of it, and this is what's going on over here. And none of that is easy or frictionless in a Word document, but it is pen on paper. And then, as I say, it's gone. And that's the power of it.
All right. So I totally submit to that. I suppose I also love seeing the ink come out of the nib.
There is something beautiful about that. There's an agency there, isn't there? This was blank, and now there's a mark, and you are mark making, and that is a very primitive and powerful human instinct.
Yeah, as opposed to I push my button on a keyboard that has a letter, and then it magically appears some distance away on a screen, which, by the way, is probably clouded with notifications, 16 other tabs, and anything else that can pollute our ability to think for 6 minutes.
Well, that is the other really key thing, because very few people have got the discipline to shut everything else down and just have a Word document open. They're going to have the email notifications going. And part of the reason that exploratory writing is so good for us is that it creates this little window of time and space where we are not hooked up to a device. We're not available for other people to distract us or notify us or ping us. It's our time and our space. And I think that's one of the ways that you signal that to yourself is by coming offline. And I don't know how much time you spend online a day, Minter. I mean, I spend more time online than I'm sleeping. And that's not good for us as human beings. It's not what we were designed for. So even if it's just 6 minutes, 6 minutes where it's quite subversive, nobody can track what you're doing. That feels... Nobody can monetize your attention. I just feel quite subversive these days, doesn't it?
The thought police are going to be after you, Alison.
It's too bad. I've put the stuff in the recycling. They'll never find it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you mentioned the 2,316 interactions we have every day, or some study shows that we have on average that interactions with our iPhone every day. So I went back and I calculated how many seconds that represents of our day. What percentage of seconds does that represent if every interaction is just a second, and of our waking day? And it comes out to something like 1 out of every 12 seconds, which just
it's staggering, isn't it?
Mind-numbing. So this is an important point for me. If I come at this from psychedelics or psychedelic assisted therapy, there's an element of doing a trip, and it's an ephemeral instance, more like a run could be. You do a run like you run every day, notably, but the psychedelics, I don't do that every day. However, there's a notion of integrating what went on during the trip. So it's hard to actually journal the trip because it's really a white piece of paper with a lot of stuff going on. In this 6-minute module of writing, then you throw it out. I was wondering to what extent you might ever keep, reread, go back, integrate, because especially when you're wanting to tackle a specific idea, whether it's the town hall exercise or whatever, we have so many of these great exercises. is there not a place for keeping and rereading, or is rereading
Absolutely.
scribble impossible?
Yeah, the rereading you do kind of when you've just finished, you go back and you kind of go, whoa, that was a lot of stuff. And you kind of pick out a lot of it's junk, and that's fine because you've got to dig through a lot of dirt to get to the gold, but the gold will be there, and then you've got to decide what to do with it. So typically for me, there'll be one or two things at the end of a writing sprint. Sometimes there's more. There's always at least one that I'm like, right, that matters, that's significant, and then you have to decide what to do with it. Often it will go on a to-do list. I'm like, okay, I can do that one action. I get that. That's doable, and there it goes on the to-do list. Sometimes it's less amenable to just putting on a to-do list, and it's more of an insight, and it's more something I want to maybe take into another writing sprint or discuss with somebody, or action. That's when a journal can be great, because then you've got a place to capture the stuff that comes out of the writing sprint. But I think it's at that point that you want to be writing it neatly in something that's going to last. And you need to have gone through, well, I need to have gone through the freer, scruffier, more temporary trip of writing beforehand.
I'm Bruce Martin, host of Pit Pass Indy. Each week, I go behind the scenes of the NTT IndyCar Series and introduce our listeners to the biggest stars of IndyCar, which features the Indianapolis 500 as its cornerstone event. The men and women that compete in IndyCar may be the bravest athletes in all of sport, as danger lurks around every corner. They are able to look danger in the eye without flinching. That is why the NTT IndyCar Series features the best racing on the planet. Join me every week as we talk to the stars of IndyCar, including the legends of the Indianapolis 500, on Pit Pass Indy from Evergreen Podcast.
So you have the many exercises. I want to get to a couple of them afterwards, but one of the things that struck me was knowing how to, and perhaps it goes back to that instinctive collaboration piece, framing the question, getting the nudge that's right. And so often in brainstorming sessions, people will even go with the yes-no type of binary approach. Obviously, it should be open questions. But what advice do you have in framing this type of movement into a free space of writing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right. We're very bad at asking questions generally. We tend to ask of others and ourselves leading or closed questions. The great thing about setting time aside deliberately for exploratory writing is that it allows you a bit of time and intention around setting that initial question. And I think we all know what makes a good question, even if we don't always do it. I say in the book, if I ask my son when he comes back, did you have a good day at school? I mean, I get a grunt, and fair play to him. It's a rubbish question. So I am when I remember, quite conscious about asking more interesting, open questions. What's the coolest thing that happened today? Something like that. You get a much more interesting answer. So I think most of us instinctively know the principles of asking good questions. We rarely apply it to ourselves. This is, inquiry, isn't it? It's a great process. It's a really foundational process for working on yourself and for getting things done in an organization. So choosing something that's forward-looking and open, and, as I say, instinctive elaboration means that you're going to start coming up with some answers. So I think I use in the book the example, if you say to yourself, why am I so disorganized? That's a kind of rubbish question. You're going to come up with some really toxic answers to that. But if you turn it to be more positive, more forward-looking, more operational, you might say something like, what's one thing that I could do today to be more organized? Or when am I at my most organized? Or what supports me in becoming more organized? And all of those are questions that are much more likely to lead you to answers that are going to be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I reflect back on, we're good at asking questions. I feel actually we're pretty terrible at asking questions. I mean, we may know what they are. I don't know. But you write about how there are 3 reasons for doing this. And the third one I thought really hit me like a sledgehammer. It says, we have an inbuilt tendency to miss what's in front of us and see what we want to see. So this is a flashback to whenever my wife says, you go pick something that's in the fridge, and I go to the fridge and I inevitably never see it. And then aggravated, irritated, she gets up, goes to the fridge and says, that was right in front of you, you idiot. So somehow I didn't want to see it or something. But it coming back to the questions that we ask, maybe many of these questions are not so obvious to us, or personally, I went through the exercise of thinking, well, what sort of question am I going to ask myself here? So the blank sheet of the blank sheet, I was like, all right, how do you get into the things that are disturbing you, or that you can then approach through your exploratory writing?
Well, there's a list of prompts at the back of the book for people who genuinely have no idea where to start. So, use those. They're great places to start. But, if you've ever been coached or you've done any kind of coaching work or training, essentially what you're doing with exploratory writing is becoming your own coach. So a coaching question, Michael Bungay-Stanier says, what's on your mind? Is the kind of the great opening question. So what's on my mind today? That in itself is going to open up stuff. And it kind of, I don't want anybody to get too hung up on the question that they set themselves, because it is just a way of getting started. It's a jumping off point. And as I say in the book, it might be miles away from where you land, and that's okay. There is no obligation. This is not an exam where you have to, read the question and make sure you've answered it in all three parts. It's just a way of getting started. And then once you're started, the writing has a life and momentum of its own. It can take you somewhere you never thought you'd go, and that's completely fine too. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter where you start, as long as it is a start that's open enough and curious enough to start opening things up rather than closing them down or making you defensive or any kind of negative thing that's going to shut this down and go into sort of self-blame or negative self-talk, rather than curiosity, which, as I say, is one of those kind of, if you're going to be an explorer, the foundation of that is being curious about the world. And that's, I think, the best frame of mind in which to approach it.
Yeah, so I was enjoying that aspect when you write about the mindset of the adventurer. And here's a funny thing. I talk about the mindset of a great leader, and I used an acronym, CHECK. And first one, C, curiosity, H, humility, E, empathy, and all three of which you write about.
Yeah.
But the other, so you had four for the adventure: curiosity, humility, adaptability, and humor. And it's rare that we really talk about humor, I'd say, certainly in a business context. So give us a little bit more about why humor is useful in this.
I think it keeps you in a really playful place if you're open to being funny with yourself. The great thing about exploratory writing, of course, is that sometimes our humor is really inappropriate and we have to kind of keep it away because we don't offend people. If nobody's reading this, you can go with it, and that's helpful too. You don't need to worry about self-censoring. But if you are able to see humor in even really awful situations, we know from all the research that's been done on resilience that that's a really powerful tool that our minds can use to help us process experience, help us survive experience, and come out the other side stronger. So I think humor is really important. I don't mean you should sort of, sit down and tell yourself jokes for 6 minutes, but don't knock down the humor where you find it. Celebrate it. And if you're pushing through something really difficult, really challenging, something that feels deeply uncomfortable, if you can find a moment of humor, it's incredible how much energy that can give you and how much easier it makes that task feel.
So here I am listening to you and thinking in business and in writing books, humor. Because as you were just implying, a sense of humor can be at the expense of somebody, or can be taken the wrong way. So as a publisher, I was just wondering, where does humor come in when people are writing books?
Yeah, it's so tricky, because obviously if you are funny, genuinely funny, it makes a book so engaging and readable, and it makes people like you. And when people like you as the author, they're going to stick with you, and that's all great. It's like comedians, isn't it? Lots of people like getting up on stage and telling jokes. Not all of them are very funny. No. So I think if you are not naturally good at doing humor in a book, then you need to, what I think the one bit of advice I would give you is get someone to check this over. Someone you can trust, someone who is not afraid to tell you if it's coming across as cringy or clumsy or even offensive. Like getting up and telling jokes on stage, it can be an edgy business. So if it's done well, brilliant, but it's so often done poorly. But in exploratory writing, it don't matter. That's a great joy.
Indeed. So another general question, I want to get into a couple of specifics afterwards. Writing the book for you was clearly not exploratory. I mean, it is at some level, but really it's not in the same vein. What did you learn from writing the book?
Oh, wonderful question. You're right. The end product, the book, it is not an output of a single exploratory writing session, but almost everything in there began in an exploratory writing session. So I think of it as a 2x2 matrix, because I think of the whole of life as a 2x2 matrix. But down at the sort of bottom left, where you are just talking to yourself and you aren't very clear about what it is you're saying, that to me is the domain of exploratory writing. And then up at the top right, when you've got much more clarity about what it is you're saying and you're ready to go public to people who've never met you before, then that's is a sort of expository form of writing, and that's where the book sits. But along the way, you're doing things like you're keeping stuff to yourself, but you're going deeper, and that might be an iterative series of exploratory writing sprints, or a longer form piece of writing that you do to take this itch of an insight that you've got and really dig into it and expand it and do some research. And that on the other sort of matrix, when you are less clear, but you're involving other people, you've got that kind of engagement piece where you're sitting down with other people, perhaps around we do a virtual campfire every Friday, and you're going, yeah, I've got this idea, and what do you think about this? And bringing other people into that as well is really important. So there's I think, we say writing like it's one thing. Writing is like 500 different things, and very often it looks a lot like staring out the window or going for a run, because it's got this. It's difficult work. You are making what John Hawkins calls invisible work. You're making what's in your head, what you don't even quite understand yourself, into something that other people, you've got that amazing ability of books to become little kind of portals into somebody else's brain at a completely different time in a completely different place. And there's a lot of steps to go through on the way there, and a lot of false starts and iterations and reconfigurations of the structure of the book, in my case, and all that kind of good stuff. And it's all good, because you don't go from idea to finished product in one hit, not with anything that's worth reading.
So just to go back to the matrix, or what I was understanding of the 2x2, you must have worked at BCG. One angle is clarity somehow, and the other axis is more about number of people. So you have
privacy.
me to more, and then the other one is messy to clear.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was intuiting. And then through the writing of the book, what you were talking about, the iterativeness of your process. What would be the thing that maybe surprised you the most? What was that came out of it like, whoa, I didn't expect that?
I'm not sure if this is quite answering your question, but it was certainly the biggest shock, in a sense, is that the table of contents that I originally had didn't work. And I knew it wasn't working. And it was causing me real frustration and angst and a resentment almost of the book. And I couldn't fix it. And I do this for other people all the time, Minter. I am so good at helping other people uncover structures and put their ideas into a really strong process or structural, system that allows other people to grab a hold of them. And it was killing me that I couldn't do it for myself. And I actually reached out to one of the development editors in the Practical Inspiration team and said, look, I'm kind of embarrassed by this, but I need help. And I sent it to her, and she was like, okay, there's lots of good stuff, but it's not working. I was like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. And she suggested a different structure. Interestingly, it wasn't actually the structure that I went with in the end, but it enabled me to find it. It was the stepping stone that got me there. And that was a real learning. It was a real, humble pie moment, because how ridiculous that I can't do this for myself when I can do it for other people. It was a real learning. It was a real lesson in the value of reaching out, of getting other people's fresh eyes on the thing.
Asking for help,
exactly. And also in my own ability to take some feedback, to take some ideas, and having got unstuck, to bring it to a new place. And I'm very happy with the way it is now. But yeah, it was not easy getting there.
Yeah, break to rebuild, it sounded like.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I love the idea of introducing vulnerability somehow into that, because to ask for help is to suggest you're not perfect, is to suggest you don't know everything, and well, hallelujah, that is the reality of our situation, and hence the interesting elements of humility and curiosity. So your book is, I must say that at the beginning when I read the book, I was like, this is just going to be about free-flowing writing. And so little by little, of course, I got into the weeds and the strength of your book, and really understood the concepts of how to use this idea of 6 minutes to liberate yourself. There are a couple exercises that really struck out for me, and one of them was the empathy exercise, naturally a topic of great interest for me. I'd love for you to describe the way you wrote about it. It's an imaginative leap, and the sense making of storytelling.
Yeah.
So empathy exercise, tell us more.
So I guess, you know that wonderful book, Surrounded by Idiots, so often we're just like, why are they being so annoying? Why did they react like that? But we're not really asking ourselves. We're just, carping at them. And if you have an important relationship that is being tricky, or if you are unsettled by a prickly response that you didn't expect, and you don't understand what's behind it, we have this attribution bias. So when we are snappy to someone, or we don't answer a question properly, and we just, if we're rude to someone, we understand why that was. We were stressed. We were in a rush. There was all these situational factors that stopped us being the polite, kind, generous person that we deep down are. We don't apply that to other people. We go, wow, what a rude person. Or, I can't believe they're so annoying. So in a sense, it's a mind game, as all of exploratory writing is really. But it's just, if you take the time and trouble to put yourself in the other person's shoes, this is a total work of fiction. You have no way of knowing what's on their mind, what their experience has been that morning, but just the act of becoming them imaginatively for a little while can help you see things in their perspective, can help you apply that attribution bias in their favor for a change, and might also uncover what it was you did or said that was so triggering for them. What's the need that they aren't fulfilling, in this interaction, or what's most important to them? And that can be really helpful. And you have to absolutely bring all your humility to it and understand that you haven't solved this person's psyche in your exercise, but just the act of doing it allows you to see other possibilities, to understand things a little better from their perspective. And that can only be a good thing in a relationship.
No doubt. There's I've written a book about empathy, and there's a topic it's called close communication bias, which is that you tend to, the closer you are, think that you know.
Yeah.
And for example, you'll finish the sentences, or you have this preloaded expectation of what's going to happen all the time, and that will trigger, and then things can sour because we're not listening actually to one another. So I thought the empathy exercise was really fun. The other one that really struck me was the town hall exercise. And you wrote you quoted with this, and I like this idea of talking about dialogue, Once we start getting into dialogue and practicing that, we find that there are many characters in there. And our job is to be the integrating force, the CEO that draws all the voices into union, does a kind of town hall meeting, if you like. And once you start engaging with those different voices, which I think writing really helps us do, you find that you can get much more creative solutions. So I really enjoyed that whole idea. I mean, having lived through town halls in business, what that looks like, and having the gumption to allow any questions to be asked, which so frequently is not the case because people censor or preload the questions and such. Tell us about the town hall exercise, if you would.
Well, what you just quoted there is from Megan Hayes, who was one of my podcast guests on the Extraordinary Business Book Club. She wrote The Joy of Writing Things Down, and she's done lots of research on writing and happiness. So it's a great quote, and I thought I gave a hat tip to her for the phrase because it's such a useful one. But I think, again, we have this kind of illusion that we are one person, one voice, one response to a situation. And actually, if you allow yourself time and space to bring those other kind of voices on the stage, you find there's lots of different reactions going on. And I use the example of if you're asked to do a presentation, fear might be the most dominant voice, and you might go, absolutely not, I'd rather pull my fingernails out or, whatever. But actually, if you think about the different aspects of you, there's a researcher perhaps in you. What's their view on this? Have they got some ideas about how you might cover this? There's probably a leader in you or an emerging leader. How could this be an opportunity for you to create a role for yourself in the company? So allowing the most dominant voice to speak first, because it always will. And, generally it's fear and it has to have its say. So that's fine. You're never going to get rid of it. You might as well just let it kind of sputter to grind to a halt. And at that point, bring out these alternative ways of looking at the situation and explicitly acknowledge to yourself. That Walt Whitman thing, isn't it? Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. And we do, each one of us. We think about the same thing differently at different times of the day, depending on how resourced we are or how much coffee we've drunk. So really leaning into that and finding a more helpful response or a more interesting reaction is a really powerful thing to do, because it gives you that sense of agency, that sense that in any situation, there are parts of you that are more resourced to deal with this, and they might not be the loudest parts.
Yeah, it's this notion of the white page story, because if you sort of just fill it with black and fear, then you can't write on top of that. But fortunately, there's more space on your page. It made me think of this notion of conversation in general. How I've asked a writer, a friend of mine, a fiction writer, to explain how to write dialogue between two people. So one person who's writing two people's voices, in this case, that have a contrary opinion. So how do you avoid having your opinion be the dominant opinion when you're trying to have this balanced conversation? And then the other thing which was interesting, which relates into a lot of what you're talking about, which is that actually in real life, our conversations are decidedly messy, are not at all following any linearity. And shit goes backwards and forwards and upside down, and then you come back to it later, and then you trigger another story, and that story triggers a story. And just like in your process, somehow, you may start at one place and end up in a totally different place. And I really felt like somehow, like these multiple voices that we're talking about, and how conversation isn't just this perfect word processed piece of dialogue, but it is a messy process. And I felt like it kind of really parallels this sort of human way that we think and interact.
Yeah, and what's wonderful about writing as a strand of activity amongst all of that, because it's all good, of course, but when we're thinking and when we're speaking, it's gone, it's here and it's gone, and then the next word comes, and there's no way of, well, I mean, you can record, of course, but essentially there's only one thing in front of you at any one time. When you write, it's kind of a way of unspooling the thread in a way that means you can retrace your steps, come back to the topic if you've lost yourself. It makes the path visible. And that's enormously helpful, because it is that first step to getting everything out of the hot mess of your brain into a form that you can see and process and select from, and in time turn into something fit for human consumption.
Making the invisible visible.
Mm.
Alison Jones, a lovely chat. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for doing this. I think it's a really useful tool. Your book is laden with great tools and ideas how to do it. And 6 minutes a day, shit, we can all do that. So
Exactly.
it's practical and realistic. How can people get your book? When can they get it? Pre-order it? And how would you like anyone else to follow or track you down or whatever you'd like?
Okay, let me unpack those 16 questions. So the book is available wherever you buy your books. It's available for pre-order at the moment as we speak, but of course it will be published, the ebook will be published on the 12th of December and the paperback on the 13th of December. And yes, the same pre-order anywhere. And if you want to find out more about me, more about the book, you can look at exploratorywriting.com, which will take you to a page on my site, alisonjones.com. If you want to find out more about the Extraordinary Business Book Club and the podcast, many of those conversations went into the book. That's Extraordinary Business Book Club podcast. And then there's Practical Inspiration Publishing, which is the publishing house that is publishing the book. And take a look for some brilliant books there as well.
Fabulousness. Alison, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minter. It's been so much fun.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust is the reason, still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust in my reason and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, put to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man, in the arms of a woman.
I'm Bruce Martin, host of Pit Pass Indy. Each week, I go behind the scenes of the NTT IndyCar Series and introduce our listeners to the biggest stars of IndyCar, which features the Indianapolis 500 as its cornerstone event. The men and women that compete in IndyCar may be the bravest athletes in all of sport, as danger lurks around every corner. They are able to look danger in the eye without flinching. That is why the NTT IndyCar Series features the best racing on the planet. Join me every week as we talk to the stars of IndyCar, including the legends of the Indianapolis 500 on Pit Pass Indy from Evergreen Podcast.